Haftara for this week, which matches the subject matter of the Parsha, being the count of the Jewish people. So Haftara from the Novi Hosea says, "Hayom bamidbar b'nei Yisrael k'chol hayom asher lo yisofer asher lo yimad v'lo yisofer." Numbers of the Jewish people will be of such great quantity that they cannot be measured nor counted. We don't have a number for it. So how do we understand that? Do we take it literally that there'll be 100 billion Jews in the world? Which seems unlikely. So if we look at the story of the Jewish people over the ages, there's a very interesting pattern. The Jewish population goes in waves. It's not an upward graph. I keep on having politics in mind. It's not an upward graph, but that it has its ups and downs. So, for instance, we start in the Chumash, B'shivim nefesh yordu avoseinu Mitzrayim. When Yaakov's family came to Egypt, there were 70. In a short period of time, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in a relatively short period of time. Out of the enormous amount, Gemara says, Noldu Shisha Bekeres Echad, women had sextuplets, 6 at a time. Enormous population growth. But in Egypt, it was diminished. Going out of Egypt, it was diminished. The Chamushi Molu B'nai Yisrael Eretz Mitzrayim. Only a percentage went out of Egypt. Whether we say a fifth, a 50th, but only a percentage went out. Nevertheless, the count that exists here of the Yotzei Mitzrayim is substantial. It's 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, plus another 20-some thousand Levium. And if we add in the women and the children and the elderly, so you get approximately 3 million people. So from 70, it went to 3 million in 200 and some years, 210 years, whatever, which is an enormous increase. Then the Jewish people enter the land of Israel. And between the time they enter the land of Israel and the time of the Churban Bayis Sheni, which is a period of about 1,000 years. So if the Jewish people would have increased at the same rate, 70 to 3 million, so then they would have increased from 3 million to like 100 million. Yet Josephus points out that in the census that the Roman Empire took at the time of the destruction of the temple, the Romans were the first ones to really, except for us, but the Romans were the first ones to really take account of the people that were under their control. And in fact, the word census is a Latin word. So there were, he said, about 6 million Jews. So it went from 3 million to 6 million in 1,000 years. So it went from 70 to 3 million in 200 years, 410 years, even we say 400 years. And it went from 3 million to 6 million in 1,000 years. Then there is an enormous decrease in population, not only in Jewish population, but the world population as well, for various reasons that have never really been clarified to us why it happened. But at the time of the Roman Empire, at the time of Julius Caesar, there were 125 million people in the world, which is the population of Japan today. And then it's estimated that after the Dark Ages, so let's say at the time of the Crusades, there were only about 100 million people in the world. It was a product of famine, of wars, of disease, all sorts of things that can be explained but don't really explain anything. You know, you have that a lot of times in life, that things are explained to you, but when it's all over, you understand that it's not explained. Especially true of rabbis. So at the time of the Crusades, we're talking about a very small number of Jews. The Yeoman of Tudela, before he lived on the street here, so he made a trip around the Jewish world, and he left a record. So, for instance, he comes to the town of Lunel in Provence, southern France. Lunel was a famous town in Jewish circles. Chachmei Lunel. They had great Talmidei Chachomim, they had a great yeshiva. Rabbi Yonasan HaKohen was from Lunel. So he says there were 300 Jewish families in Lunel, and that was, he said, a Ir Gdola beProvence. 300 families, it was, one building in Wolfson, whatever, two. The whole thing. And for instance, we commemorate now the Crusades, and we're going to have Shavuos time, the fact that the cities of Spires and Worms and Mainz were sacked by the Crusaders, and we have a kina about it and all the whole thing. But you're talking maybe 600 Jews died, 700 Jews died, which is not to minimize the tragedy, God forbid. But in our time, when we talk about numbers, that isn't 5 minutes in Auschwitz. So now the Jewish people are small in number. At the end of the Crusades, there are about 500,000 Jews in Spain and about 1 million Jews in the rest of Europe. Austria mainly, Germany. And they're kicked out of Spain, Spanish exile. So half the Jews, 250,000, scatter. They become the Sephardic diaspora. And the other half convert and will disappear from the Jewish people. In spite of their efforts to remain secret Jews, it just didn't work. So by 1700, before the time of the Gaon of Vilna, we're talking about the time after Shabtai Tzvi, and the beginning of what we could call the modern era. There are about 2.5 million Jews in the world. So you went from 6 million at the Churban Bayis Sheni to 2.5 million 1,600 years later. At that rate, chas v'sholom, the Jewish people would disappear. And especially, you're under the rule of the Russian Tsar and the Prussian Kaiser and the Austrian Emperor, all of whom are very inimical to Jews. And Jews are poverty-stricken. They have almost no rights. So on the surface, it looks like they're doomed. And then a remarkable thing happens. From about 1750 to 1939, let's say 200 years, the Jewish population in Europe alone reaches 11 million. It goes from 2.5 million in the world to 11 million in Europe. And then there are 5 million that somehow are in the United States. And there's another 3 million Jews in the world. So 1939, there are at least 19 million Jews in the world, which according to many historians and demographers and people who make up these things, that was the high water mark. The most Jews that there ever were in the world. 19 million. So again, the graph is up and down and up and down. Now it's up. Comes the Second World War. So first of all, the First World War also arrested the growth. Because in the First World War, 250,000 Jews were killed. And it dislocated the entire Jewish infrastructure in Europe. But the Second World War destroyed 6 million Jews. So if there were 19 million and 6 million were destroyed, so that should have left over 13 million in 1945. Again, by natural rate of birth and increase, 1945 to 2019, 74 years, 75 years. So we should be 25 million. But the statistics show that there's barely 15 million in the world. It never made back yet what was lost in the Second World War, which is an astounding thing to think of. Because Germany, for instance, well, you can't really tell because of immigration, but Germany has increased its population by, I think, 12 or 15%. Germany was destroyed in the war, and they lost 12 million men. So what does it mean that it will not be able to be counted? Not able to be counted, we would hope that there would be a restoration of what was lost. So all of this is a price, naturally, of, in our time, of assimilation. It's a price of secularism. It's a price that, for instance, Jewish America is not replacing itself. The birth rate is less than 2 points. You need 2.2 just to stay even. And in the United States, it's about 1.9, 1.8. And that's, if you took out the Orthodox, it would be even worse. Because the Orthodox are the only ones who are replacing themselves. And here in Eretz Yisrael, Baruch Hashem, the birth rate is 3.4 or something like that. And among the Orthodox, it's close to 4. But in the rest of the Jewish world, there's nobody home. And there's, again, all sorts of reasons people don't want to commit, whatever that means. Whoever wanted to commit? Like that was something new that was discovered, that if you got married, it's a commitment. And then the children are expensive, and they're a bother, whatever. So when the Novi promises us that we won't be counted, he evidently has a different count in mind than just the count of a census. He has a count of not just of value, but a count of influence. He has a count of disproportionate strength in the world. I mean, if you read the newspapers of 1948, when the state was founded, all the pundits, all the experts are rarely, if ever, right. So they said it's 300 million Arabs and it's 600,000 Jews. Make the math. Goodbye. So when the Novi says, Asher lo yimad lo yisofer, in effect he's saying, don't make the math. He's saying the opposite of what it looks like it says. Don't count. Don't measure. Because of the fact that when the Sheris B'nai Yisrael, those that survived, the graph will go up again, so to speak. The Lord will come to protect them. They'll have a special role. And therefore, he says, instead of saying, you're not lo ruchoma, you are ruchoma. Instead of lo ami, you are b'nei ami. Everything that you thought negative will have to turn out to be positive for you. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash Omer Rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Zakas Yisrael V'ila V'Herbel Torah Mitzvah Shenera Nocha V'Ezman Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir Yizkadal Yizkadash Me'Yavad Amen.